The chairperson of the AU Commission, Mosa Faki Mahamat, said on a statement, and I quote, President Robert Mugabe will be remembered as a fearless Pan-Africanist liberation fighter and the father of the independent Zimbabwean nation. His decision to resign will go down in history as an act of statesmanship that can only bolster President Mugabe's political legacy. End of quote. Ever since the military takeover of the country, the African Union has boldly expressed its stance, saying any unconstitutional change of government will have consequences for Zimbabwe. And now that President Robert Mugabe has willingly stepped down from power, the AU is happy that the process has seen no bloodletting and chaos. The African Union said it looks forward to Zimbabwe continuing to play a leading role in the affairs of the African continent as a democratic and prosperous state, meeting the aspirations of its people. And the continental grouping will continue assisting Harare's journey to democracy and prosperity. Grumtala CGTN at the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa.
Let's get you more perspective now on the way forward for Zimbabwe. I'm joined live from our Johannesburg studios by Piers Pigou. He's a Southern Africa senior consultant at the International Crisis Group. Piers, what's your take on the resignation of Robert Mugabe as president of Zimbabwe?
Well, as much as it is presented as a voluntary act, and I just heard your presenter referring to how some people think it's an act of statesmanship, President Mugabe did not voluntarily resign. He was forced into this position. This was not his intention. He wanted to remain at the helm. He wanted to stand next year as the party's candidate. But as his support pillars were stripped away from him, firstly under the barrel of a gun and then through the confines of what his own party did to him and to those around him on Sunday, and then subsequently the impeachment process that was put in place, he really had no choice but to fall on his sword. One could argue, of course, that this has been a long time coming and is a long time overdue. At the age of 93, Robert Mugabe was well past his prime as a leader, and one only has to look at the charge sheet that his own party put up against him in terms of the impeachment, which indicated just how far he had fallen in the eyes of many of the people that had been praising him for nearly 4 decades.
So what needs to be done now to ensure a smooth transition in Zimbabwe?
Well, I mean, you know, we're still operating in the land of speculation. As your report noted earlier, Emmerson Mnangagwa has returned. There's a considerable speculation on what kind of administration he's going to put together in a new government after he has been sworn in, the extent to which and how it will bring in a disparate range of interests, firstly from within ZANU-PF, and you know, the divisions remain within the party, and he has to look for how he's going to try and bridge those, but also whether or not he will look outside of the party or not. There's been a significant call from a number of areas that he should be magnanimous, should look for some kind of inclusive government, some kind of inclusiveness. Others are talking about the possibility of a transitional arrangement. Again, your correspondent in Addis was talking about the journey to democracy. Well, what we've heard in the last week or so is an admission from, first of all, the Zimbabwe Defense Forces commander and from Emmerson Mnangagwa himself about the list of deficits that are on the table in relation to the democratic conditions in Zimbabwe, ironically echoing many of the calls that have been made by opposition and civil society groups over the years, but have largely been ignored or denied. So, you know, much depends on who he puts around the table and what kind of policy program he's going to lay out. This is going to really help determine whether there is a transition that is merely a change of guard within ZANU-PF, or whether this really is a transition that sets a new course for Zimbabwe's politics.
Right, and we know Zimbabweans face several challenges from unemployment to poverty. Those aren't going to go away anytime soon. So what should Zimbabwe's new leadership be focused on to ensure long-term solutions?
Yes, you hit on perhaps one of the most critical immediate problems at the moment, which is the state of the economy, which is in a really seriously negative state and on a downward trajectory. In fact, tomorrow the budget for next year is meant to be put on the table for discussion. I'm not sure whether that will happen when the current Minister of Finance is apparently in detention. But the big problem, of course, is there is a huge liquidity crisis which relates to government overspending. Government has been unable to access funds despite its efforts to re-engage with the international financial institutions in what is known as the Lima strategy that was agreed by the government in late 2015, 2 years ago. There is a chance to resuscitate that, which will help hopefully Zimbabwe to repay the arrears on its debt and to start the process of accessing new lines of credit. But there's going to be some pain in that process in terms of the reform, or some of the reforms, and particularly around cuts in the civil service. And this will have negative impact on the few remaining jobs in the formal sector of Zimbabwe. So one can expect, on the basis of economic formulas that are being put on the table for recovery, that there will be a certain amount of pain being felt by ordinary Zimbabweans. And this may well include some kind of devaluation of the currency. Even though they're using US dollars officially, we know that the money that is being largely traded through the electronic money system in the banks and through the bond notes is being traded at a particular rate which shows a hyperinflationary tendency at the moment, which of course means the purchasing powers of what is going into the bank of ordinary Zimbabweans is slipping literally by the day.
Right, let's leave it there for now. Piers Pigou in Johannesburg, we appreciate your time. Thank you.